What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video. Today we're going to be discussing tanking CPs across various CP checkpoints, I guess is the best way to put them. So these CP checkpoints I pretty much chose fairly arbitrarily, but they kind of line up with certain certain significant parts of the game. Like when you get to this specific CP level, it kind of opens up new things for you to do. So this is kind of how I would allocate my CP as a tank at these various CP levels. So the various CP checkpoints are going to be CP 160, obviously because that is when you hit the gear cap. CP 300, that is when you no longer gain additional attribute points for every CP point that you gain. CP 450, that's kind of an happy medium as to where people say, okay, this is kind of where you can start doing vet trials, especially as a tank and a healer. What people tend to look for in tanks and healers is not just your ability to tank and heal, but also your CP points, because especially as a tank, the more CPs you have, the less damage you'll end up taking, so the more survivable you are. So CP 450 is kind of like the middle ground as to where people, what CP level people ask for when you're going to tank or heal a vet trial. It's usually anywhere between CP 400 and CP 500. I have seen tanks finish vet content on as low as CP 300, so it's not a hard rule, but it is one that most people tend to stick to. And the last checkpoint is going to be CP 600. That's generally when people start to say, okay, you can now start taking the vet DLC trials, because those tend to be a lot more punishing on the tank than the base game trials, the Kraglorn trials. And of course, CP 690 is the current cap. If you guys want to know what CP point distributions I use at CP 690, max CP, check out my tanking video under the Builds Guides playlist. Alright, so I believe I might be on my STAM DPS spec right now, so let me check real quick. Yes, I am on my STAM DPS spec right now, so I will have to go to redistribute, so clear all my points. So we'll start off with the green CPs. So this is going to be for CP 160, so that basically you've hit the gear cap. When you're at CP 160, you have 54 into red, 53 into green, and 53 into blue, I believe. I believe that's the distribution of CP points. So here's how I would distribute my CPs. So for tanks, unlike for DPS, you still want to put an emphasis on tenacity and arcanus, but you're not going to be putting as much, because you do have another node that you're going to want to put points into, and that's Shadow Ward right here, because that reduces the cost of blocking. So we have 53 points to play around with here. So we're going to go for a little bit of a balanced approach right now. So we're going to do 23 in tenacity and arcanus, so that gives us 46, and then you can put the remaining 7 points into Shadow Ward. So this kind of lets us hit our jump points. So remember that basically CP percentages are always floored, so anything that comes after the percentage point, the decimal point, can pretty much be ignored. So 6.17 and 6.4 in this example, they both round down to 6. So in order to get up to 7%, you would have to actually get up to 27 points, because then you become 7.07 instead of 6.85. So those are what we call jump points, because they jump you up to the next whole number. So this particular distribution lets you hit those jump points across all 3 nodes here. So this is how I would set up my green CP. So we do have an emphasis on Arcanus and Tenacity, just because Magicka regen is pretty important, and getting more resources back when you heavy attack as a tank really helps out your stamina sustain. But we're also not ignoring Shadow Ward here for that block cost reduction. For our blue CPs, this is going to be pretty simple. Basically, we're just going to put 27 into Blessed and 26 into Elfborn like this. So we won't be hitting, we hit the jump point for both of these. As a tank, blue CPs don't really matter, because blue CPs tend to be focused more on DPS, and obviously as a tank you won't be DPSing as much. So most tanks will end up going with 100 in Blessed and 100 in Elfborn. I personally don't like to do it, because the jump point below 100 is 75, I believe, for both of them, or it might be a little bit less than that. But I don't like to bump 100 into both of them, because to me that's a little bit of a waste of extra CPs that can be put elsewhere. So the other node that you're going to want to kind of focus on, but not as heavily, is going to be Precise Strikes. So Precise Strikes is not going to be used as much, because this only scales of Vigor, which is your only stamina heal. Elfborn will help out with your green dragon blood instead. So that's kind of why we put a little bit more emphasis on the Elfborn, because green dragon blood is the stronger heal. So obviously we want our stronger heal to get more, to see more benefit. But you also don't want to ignore precise strikes either, because vigor is a good heal to have. Even though they did increase the cost of it, it's still a decent heal to have on hand in case you don't have enough magicka to use green dragon blood. And it also acts as a heal over time, which can be very helpful in certain scenarios where you have dots ticking on you. So the heal over time and the dots sort of cancel each other out there. And for our red CPs, so basically this is gonna vary based on your tanking style, but you're gonna want to focus in on Hardy and Elemental Defender first, because those just give you the best return on CP point invested, because they don't differentiate between damage over time and direct damage abilities, unlike Thick-Skinned and Ironclad. So those will give you the best return per CP that you invest into it. So we have 54 points to play around with here. So this is kind of what I would do. I'd do 15, that gives us 30, that leaves us 24. Then I would go 11 and 11, so we hit the jump points for Thick-Skinned and Ironclad. So this is 41, plus the 11 is 52, and we need to put the last 2 points into Bastion. So we do get an additional 1% damage shield. Bastion is very useful because it will boost your Igneous Shield strength, which in turn boosts the strength of the shield that you give to your allies when you use Igneous Shields. So don't ignore Bastion, but you can pretty much reserve Bastion for last, just because damage shields, as we covered in a previous video, the resistances don't really matter when it comes to how much damage a damage shield takes. So it's not quite as important to have larger damage shields as a tank as it is to get pure damage mitigation. So that's CP 160. That's how I would set up my CP points. So we're just going to clear everything again. Now we're going to move on to CP 300. So at this point you have 100 CPs to distribute across all 3 colors. So 100 green, 100 red, 100 blue. So we're going to do 43 and 43, like so. So we hit 10% on both. And then we're going to put the remaining 14 into Shadow Ward. So we have 86 here and 14 into Shadow Ward. So we were not actually quite getting to the jump point. We're off by 2 points here, but it's still better than nothing. As you're leveling your CP, just want to keep in mind that you're not necessarily going to be able to hit jump points every single time you put in a CP point in. Just put them in until you hit the next CP point, and then start moving on to other nodes and things like that. It all depends on how you want to play it. But that's kind of what I would focus in on. So basically, kind of go for a balanced approach with Arcanist and Tenacity, and work on Shadow Ward as well. Remember that since they rebalance CPs, basically they're more front-weighted now, so you get 75% of your CP tree, the full value, at around 50-ish or so. So do keep that in mind when you're kind of deciding which nodes to put things into. So for example, if you don't want to put things into Tenacity or Arcanist, you could put points into things like Tumbling or Warlord to kind of reduce the amount of stamina you use when you have to use Break Free or Dodge Rolling. You could put points into Bashing Focus as well if you want to reduce the cost of Bash, but that's not really that big of a deal. So that's just other things you kind of want to consider when you're distributing this stuff out as you gain more CPs. For our blue CPs, we have 100, so basically what we're going to do here is we're going to do 49 to Blessed, 50 to 51 into Elfborn. That gets us up to the 2 jump points here. So that's 100 points there. So like I said, we could put a couple points into Precise Strikes if we'd like to help boost our Vigor heals, but that's not quite important right now at CP 300. It's more important to get that Blessed and Elfborn both out, just because Blessed will improve both Vigor and Green Dragon Blood. And for our red CPs, we're going to go again for a more balanced approach with a little bit more emphasis on Hardy and Elemental Defender. So we're going to go with 32 across both, which gets us to the 8%. Then we're going to go with 20, not 20, I lied. 16, and the remaining 4 can go into Bastion. So we don't quite get up to the 2% jump point here with Bastion, but again, like I said, you're not going to be able to hit those jump points all the time as you're adding points in. So again, we're putting a little bit more emphasis into Hardy and Elemental Defender because that is a larger source of damage mitigation compared to Thick-Skinned and Ironclad. And then we are not neglecting Bastion, it's just not a very high priority right now. Clear our CP points once again. So now we're going to do CP 450, which is 150 points across green, red, and blue. So at this point now, we're pretty much going to go 64 into Arcanist. Then I like to put 64 into Nasty, but you could actually go down to the 12% jump point, which is only 56. It kind of depends on your own tanking style. If you're just learning to tank, it might be better to put less points into Nasty because you won't necessarily be able to heavy attack as much as you're learning fight mechanics. As you get more and more experience and you're able to use more heavy attacks while you're tanking, it might be worth putting more points into Nasty, but that's kind of dependent on you and whether or not you have trouble sustaining your stamina in particular. I like to put 64 points, but you can go with 56. So I'll just stick with 56 right now, just to kind of show you how I would do it as someone who's learning how to tank vet trials. So 64 into Arcana, 66 into Nasty. That leaves 30 points left over. So we're going to put all 30 points into Shadow Ward. So we don't quite hit the 13% jump point here, but like I said, we're not going to be able to hit jump points at every single one of these checkpoints here. So at this point, we're starting to get to the point where we might want to consider putting some points into Tumbling, Warlord, Bashing Focus, other nodes. So try to keep those in the back of your head as you're continuing to level up. For me personally, I don't like putting more than like 60 to 70 points into each node just because of the diminishing returns. So on my finished tank build at max CP, I have 56 into Shadow Ward. Then I put the rest into Tumbling and Warlord. But that's kind of up to you how you want to play it. I still recommend getting plenty of points in the Shadow Ward in order to reduce the cost of blocking. That just helps out your sustain a lot, especially with the changes that are coming in Dragon Bones. Getting that the cost of block down as much as you can is going to be pretty important once Dragon Bones is released and they nerf the cost of blocking. For our blue CPs, I'm going to do 64 into Blessed. We're going to do 61 into Elfborn, and that leaves us with 25 more points, and this is where we're going to start putting points into Precise Strike. We're going to put 25 into Precise Strikes here. So we are going to start putting points into Precise Strikes at this point, mainly because, like I said, I don't like to put 100 points into Blessed or Elfborn just because I feel like those points can be better used elsewhere. But if you'd like, you can, put Blessed all the way up to 100 and put 15 into Elfborn if you'd like. That's kind of up to you how you want to play it out. But for me, I don't think the extra 1 or 2% that you get from Blessed at this point, getting it up to 100, is really worth it because you could put those points elsewhere and get better returns in other nodes. Then for our red CPs, like with CP 300, we're going to try to go for a more balanced approach with a more emphasis on Hardy and Elemental Defender. So we're going to go up to 10% jump point, which is 43. Then we're going to do 20 here. Put a little bit more emphasis onto Ironclad here, so we're going to do 26 here, and then we're going to put 18 into Bastion. So that gets us up to the 8% jump point here with Bastion. So I am putting a little bit more emphasis into Ironclad now, just because as you start getting into the endgame, damage over time abilities aren't, while they are still present, and some of them can be pretty deadly, there aren't nearly as many compared to direct damage hits that can kill you. So we do want to put a little bit more points into Ironclad compared to Thick-Skinned. But again, we do want to put more emphasis into Hardy and Elemental Defender comparatively. And then Bastion, again, is kind of an afterthought, but we don't want to necessarily ignore it because Igneous Shield is a pretty strong shield. So we do want to boost our Igneous Shields. And finally, CP 600. So we have 200 points, 200 green, 200 red, 200 blue. So here is the distribution here. So again, we're going to go with 64 into Arcanist. You could bump it up to 75 if you like. Again, me personally, I don't like adding in extra points because those points can be put elsewhere, especially in the green trees, because a lot of these points will help out your stamina sustain just because they're reducing things like block cost, breaking free, dodge roll, and things like that. So we're still going to stick with 56 into tenacity. Okay. We're going to start putting a couple of points into tumbling and warlord, so we're going to put 11 into both of them. But then the rest is going to go into Shadow Ward here. So I personally have 56 into Shadow Ward, but you can go up to the 21% jump point, which is 61 if you'd like eventually. So that's kind of what I would define as the upper limit for Shadow Ward, because at that point you're only 4% off from the ceiling for 100%, and at that point you're going to want to start putting a little bit more points into tumbling and warlord to help your stamina sustain out a little bit. Again, that's kind of up to you. If you'd like, you can put more points into Shadow Ward, up to the 23 or 23% jump point, and you can put points into Arcanist to hit 75 for that extra 1% Magicka regen, and you can put more points into Tenacity if you find yourself heavy attacking more often than you figure. So there is a lot of flexibility here when it comes to CP point distributions in the green tree. It all depends on what you want to prioritize really here. For our blue CPs, again, we're sticking with 64 with Bless, but you can go with up to 75 if you'd like. And we are sticking, we're going up to 23 with Elfborn, so that's 72. And then we're sticking the rest of our points into Precise Strikes. So this is kind of what I would do. I'd also probably hit up to 72 with Precise Strikes and kind of leave it there, because once we hit 72, we're at 23%. So it's not really worth it, at least in my opinion. Again, it's kind of up to you how you want to play it. It's not really worth it getting the extra 2% additional healing with Vigor, with the crit heals. So once you do hit 672 in Elfborn and Precise Strikes, you're going to have some points left over. So if we do hit 72, you can see here we do have 22 points left over. Because all these blue nodes are pretty much focused in on DPS, you can kind of put them wherever you'd like. It doesn't really matter where you put them, because again, if you're tanking, you're not really doing any DPS. But all the nodes here under the ritual are going to be more focused in on stamina DPS. So that is someplace that you can put things into if you'd like. The other node that you can potentially go into is Master at Arms, which helps your direct damage attacks, which do include your light and heavy attacks. Those do count as Master at Arms. So there is that. Plus, if you get 30 points into the Archer Knife, you can get Riposte. Riposte, I don't know how to pronounce it, Riposte, I don't know, which can be useful. It does help out a little bit with DPS, but it's not, absolutely essential for any tanking builds. And for our red CPs, again, we're going to put a little bit more emphasis into Hardy and Elemental Defender. So we're going to hit up 56, both of them, 31 to Thick Skinned, 40 into Ironclad, oops, sorry, 37 into Ironclad, I should say. Then we're going to put the rest 20 points into Bastion here. So at this point, I actually wouldn't put any more points into Hardy and Elemental Defender. You can hit 13% if you'd like, which is 64, I believe, is the jump point for that. But then you're going to give up a little bit into Bastion, and I like to have at least 30 points into Bastion, just for the infusion. Even though as a tank you won't be rezzing necessarily, there are going to be instances when you're off tanking where you'll be rezzing people, and so that extra infusion, that extra regen, will help out your Magicka DPS when they do get up. If you are an off tank and you're on res duty, for example, that'll help them get their Magicka back a little bit faster, so they can get back into the DPS game a little bit faster. So that's why I like to have at least 30 points into Bastion, which kind of reduces the amount of points I could put in Hardy and Elemental Defender down to 56. But that's not that big of a deal because, again, we're only 3% off from the maximum value, which is 15%. And so, diminishing returns. So that's kind of why I only have 56 into both of these two nodes. And again, direct damage is going to probably cause more deaths than dots, so that's why we have a little bit more points into Ironclad compared to Thick Skinned. So that's for all of the various CP point checkpoints there, as well as my thoughts as to which nodes you should start putting points into first as you start to level and gain more CPs. Again, if you want to see if you are at max CP, my CP distribution for my tank, you can go check out my tanking video. I'll put a link to that in the description below for you guys. But that's basically it for this video. Hope you guys found it informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.